A warm welcome back again here outside the Cape Town City Hall. Now that the budget speech is all said and done, we look forward to see how the political parties react. And first up, joining me is Dr. Dion George, the spokesperson on finance. Dr. George, coming to this speech, you were not so hopeful that he will strike the right chords. But does this budget take us to the promised new dawn?
It certainly doesn't do that. It's definitely the ANC's bailout budget. As expected, the minister is now going to raid the Reserve Bank's contingency reserve that is required for risk, to manage risk. Is going to raid that to cover some of government's debt, but it's not going to be enough. Government's already paying 1 billion rand per day in interest on its debt. So taking this 150 billion from the contingency reserve, at least that, there's going to be more. We can see it's the start of a complete raid. That's not going to make any difference whatsoever to the lives of South Africans battling the cost of living crisis. He did absolutely nothing for them. The SRD grant is extended for 1 year, but what about after that? The DA proposed evolving it into a job seekers grant. Also, the increase in the child grant it's hopelessly too little. So nothing happened here. Yes, taxes did not increase directly, but they did stealthily, because what happens was, by not adjusting the tax brackets for inflation, every South African is actually going to be paying more tax because their salaries are going up according to inflation. So there is in fact a price that South Africans are paying. Also, what the minister could have done is he could have reduced the tax on fuel, for example. He could have cut the zero VAT rated basket of food. He could have done that very easily, but chose not to. And as I said this morning, the minister would have to choose whether he's going to carry on spending unsustainably on, for example, the bloated public sector wage bill and taking the debt off from Eskom and now also from Transnet, or he can focus on the needs of the people, because there wasn't any in between. And he did a dismal job today. He really did not deliver as he should have delivered to the most vulnerable South Africans battling a cost of living crisis, with 5 million children in our country that are starving today, according to the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund.
Talking about debt, do you think he's done enough to actually rein in the debt as you would have liked?
Well, what he's done is it appears to be taking at least 150 billion from the contingency reserve, which we don't think is a good idea, throwing it into a hole that is actually not going to get plugged. That's the key thing, because the spending is the problem. And of course growth. So we've got two problems. We've got a growth problem and a spending problem. Now growth is projected downwards to 0.6%, which means that our economies actually get smaller, which means that there would be fewer people in jobs and then therefore less revenue. So that deficit is going to get wider. So by just throwing in this amount of money that will just disappear into this hole, nothing's going to happen. What we needed was a structural change, and that was the structural change on the big ticket items. Get the private sector involved in the state-owned enterprises. He said so, but there's no action on it. Also, cut back the public sector wage bill, because that gives enough room then for service delivery. Also, what happened is that he's basically rescinded the cuts that he had put into place because of the public sector wage bill. He's reversed that because he wants to actually feed that, unfortunately, and that is not going to work. But what he should have done is he should have focused on hard-working, battling South African households, the cost of living crisis. He never mentioned it once. He just simply doesn't care.
All right, Dr. Dion George, the spokesperson on finance of the DA, I'm going to ask you to just move out of picture, and I bring in now Steve Swart from the ACDP. Does Dinswalo live a better life after this budget?
Definitely not. And what we are seeing now, as we were concerned, we are seeing government debt levels increase. We're seeing the budget deficit increase. And now not only that, having run down Transnet and having run down Eskom and causing logistics crisis and causing a power crisis, which has impacted economic growth, we're now seeing a plundering of our reserve funds at the Reserve Bank. And that is a great concern. You remember earlier today, I said this is something we are concerned about. 150 billion rand from our reserve fund at the Reserve Bank. Now that is there to buffer us in case of capital outflows, and it's to protect the Reserve Bank. And now we are seeing that is being taken for the purposes of trying to balance the books. What happens next year when again we've got a problem? Is it again going to be accessed? Is it again going to be taken? So we are concerned about that aspect. I suppose one can look and say, yes, there wasn't a direct increase in the fuel price. There wasn't a direct increase in personal taxes, although bracket creep must come into it. But at the end of the day, I don't think he has addressed what is critical, and that is economic growth stimulus, so that each person can get a job, can contribute, and we can grow the economy with infrastructure development. So we as the ACDP are disappointed. We think we could have done more. But at the end of the day, we have to attribute what he's saying today to economic policies over the last 30 years that have ended and landed us as a country in where we are today, at the situation that we, for the first time ever, have to almost plunder our reserves at the South African Reserve Bank. And that is something we're going to watch very carefully. What is that money going to be used for? Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. Steve Swart from the ACDP. I see off picture as well, voter vessels from the Freedom Front Plus. Your take on the minister's budget speech?
Well, I think we are in a deep, deep crisis, and his speech and the budget actually confirms that. You know, I think Steve now also mentioned the fact that 100 billion rand is taken from the foreign exchange and gold reserve fund. That is a government that's not planning for the future and for problems and crises that might be there in the future. But the fact of the matter is also that whilst he mentions infrastructure development, which is necessary to get the economy going, in the second adjustment appropriations bill for this current financial year that you also tabled here today, he takes away 70 million rand from the public infrastructure, and he gives it to the presidency. That means that is actually, and this government is not serious about infrastructure development, because whilst saying one thing and doing the other, it's actually ridiculous. And then we have a problem with regards to actually getting the economy going. Although he did not increase taxes, the problem is that because there's no tax bracket creeping, individuals will pay more tax, and that will be detrimental to the economy. Also, not increasing the medical aid tax credits will also be detrimental. People won't have money to spend in the economy. And the multinational taxation and the global tax, minimum tax that they are also introducing is not good for companies to create employment opportunities. So we are moving in the short term and not creating a situation where there's actual economic growth.
All right, thank you so much, voter vessels. I'm going to ask you to step out of picture and bringing in the UDM Chief Whip, Mr. Ngabayomzi Kwankwa. For the UDM, does this budget speech lead us to a better life for Tinswalo?
No, it doesn't. It actually depresses the whole nation. It pushes us further and further into the quagmire simply because of the ANC's long-standing mismanagement of the South African economy. In essence, into yenzeka apha Bulelani sithengisa ihlangu, sithengisa iVascom, sithengisa izitya ze-country xa sithatha imali ku-central bank reserves in order for us to be able to feed the family because of that mismanagement. You are still doling out guarantees to Transnet, for example, for the 7 billion rands. You are still saying exactly the same things that they said when President Beki, for example, was still in charge. The only thing that they are trying to get right, they try to get right because it's an elections budget. They try to talk about increasing social grants. The first tranche will come now, the next one will be after election. So they are saying if you vote for us, we'll revow during October. The other issue, for an example, which is happening is that we are spending more and more money on debt service costs than any other time during democracy. You will consider one thing, that in about 2014, it's contained in their documents, our public debt was at 1.5 trillion rands. We are at almost 6 trillion rands. And have you made a dent in the unemployment rate? Have you made a dent in the inequality rate, in the poverty rate? The answer is an emphatic no.
All right, thank you so much, Ngabayomzi Kwankwa, the UDM Chief Whip. I'm going to ask Ms. Veronica Mente, the national chairperson of the EFF. As the EFF, how have you received this budget speech by the finance minister?
As I expected, we have had things that we knew that there is no capacity to deliver on them. To cut on NSFAS massively like that is an insult to young people of this country. To not have a plan on how we're going to grow the economy of this country, to not have a plan on how our municipalities are going to be enhance and strengthen in terms of more budget. Less budget was given to municipalities that are at the coalface of service delivery on a daily basis. They must make sure we live in hygienic areas, our water is clean, our roads and potholes are dealt with. Their municipalities' budget is cut massively. And when you come to social spending, it's also under austerity measure. The only item that we see, which is the huge item, is the debt service. And we continue to be told, no, we will slow down on borrowing. We are not told that borrowing will stop.
Are we in dangerous territory in terms of the borrowings?
We are in the West. Our debt is costing 75% of our GDP. We are not a country that should be borrowing anything, because whatever we're making goes towards paying debt, and it's not going towards the well-being of the people. Therefore, our government has no capacity and has no business borrowing. We have to make sure that we use what we have to strengthen the issue of the economy and make sure we grow it by building the facilities that are going to work, like factories, that making sure that especially public works is taking care of all the facilities of the state, and we start outsourcing, because another item is on the issue of outsourcing, where it's costing a state more than it should be. If you capacitate the state, it means that your state will spend less. But if you outsource, you are going to spend more on a budget that you do not have.
All right, thank you so much, Veronica Mende, the national chairperson of the EFF. Nkosi Mzamo Buthelezi, the deputy president of the IFP. I know you were not so hopeful coming into this budget, but did the minister strike the right chords for you?
I think the minister was very much electioneering in his budget. He, besides the nice to hear what he said, but we are very much worried about the fact that he's stepping into the reserves, which is a clear admission that they fail to ignite our economy. We can't be excited about that. As much as he has allocated some increases in different departments, but the fact of the matter is all departments are underperforming. Some are even failing to spend the allocation. We have a deficit in collection, which is a serious problem, yet government continues to actually spend, which is very much of a problem. I think he just wanted to put a budget that will actually please people outside there, knowing very well that all those things that he has committed to and he has announced won't actually work.
Thank you so much, Nkosi Mzamo Buthelezi, the deputy president of the IFP. Of course, a lot of food for thought from all the political parties that have just commented. For more reaction and analysis, I cross back to you, Nombu, on the other side.
Thanks very much. Yes, well, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana has delivered the 2024 budget speech. Indeed, he's indicated that National Treasury is going to manage to get that 15 billion rand extra in terms of tax. They're going to be doing that by not adjusting the tax brackets or the medical aid benefits that we get, as well as not adjusting for other rebates. So that's how they're going to get part of that 15 billion rand. And of course, the sin taxes, as was anticipated, they are coming up. There was an announcement about carbon taxes, which kicked in on the 1st of January 2024, but that of course would have already been something that they had put out there in the market, so that people would have been aware of that. They did indicate that because they're aware that consumers have been struggling with the high cost of living, they're not going to raise the general fuel levy. So that's good news, I guess. They say that's going to save taxpayers some 4 billion rand. But what was interesting is that, you know, there's been a lot of talk about how Transnet is such an important key player for the economy, and there have been calls by the private sector for the government to put some money in there, but there was no word on any additional funds going to Transnet in this fiscal year. We know that the government did give a guarantee of 47 billion rand, and that's really for Transnet to be able to deal with some of its outstanding debt and a couple of operation issues. Now, of course, we are going to continue in conversation with an economist, but before we do that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Tepa Mongwai, who has a politician with him.
Thank you very much, Nompumelelo. And of course, a lot of reaction coming through following the budget by the Minister of Finance. Let's get into the workers and to see what is their reaction following this budget speech. Matthew Parks from COSATU, what's your take? Do you think that the workers have got a fair share in terms of this budget?
Look, we think it's a mixed bag. There's some good things. There's some things we're quite disappointed by. We appreciate it's under very difficult circumstances for government, but we really hope to see a much more aggressive budget which is going to grow the economy, reduce unemployment, really escalate the fight against crime and corruption. We didn't really get that out of the budget. So there are some positive things about getting debt relief to Eskom, giving some additional loans, guarantee support to Transnet. Those are critical. We support withdrawing some of the reserve funds in the Reserve Bank to help government plug the fiscal holes. But we don't really see out of it what is going to get us out of this economic rut and what's going to get us out of this rut fast enough.
Workers are not getting inflation adjustment, but they are getting that once-off access to their pension, to the value up to 30,000 rand. You've been asking for it, you've got it.
Well, look, the wage negotiations are still taking place in the Public Service Bargaining Council, so that hasn't been incorporated yet. So that must still be determined. We want to give space for that, but we're quite pleased with the two-part pension reform. It's in Parliament. The National Assembly passed the initial bill yesterday, so we need to get the Parliament to conclude all the bills by April so the President can sign it. We're confident it will happen on the 1st of September, so there's been good progress in that regard. We really hope to see more support for workers and for the unemployed. So the SAD grant has been extended by another year, but it hasn't been adjusted for inflation since 2020, so it really is being eroded in terms of its value. The presidential employment program hasn't been increased. It's giving space for 400,000 young people, but we really hope, given the size of our unemployment, to have seen it increase much more substantially, especially given the President had made that commitment in the State of the Nation address.
But there are plans to invest in infrastructure. They are bringing in a lot of private sector to partner with government. There's a lot of innovation in terms of how government can tackle infrastructure. What's your take on that?
So the infrastructure programs are quite good. It's about 950 billion rand, half of it with SOEs, which is critical. I think the challenge here is to make sure that there's capacity to implement it, because we've seen many municipalities struggle to spend the money and return it to Treasury. So we really do hope to see an improvement in that regard. PRASA itself has been a culprit of getting money and then failing to spend it on infrastructure.
Thank you very much. That's Matthew Parks from COSATU. And of course, a lot of mixed reaction from this budget. And of course, the problems are not really, out of the picture currently. We still have high cost, we still have high expenditure, we still have high debt levels. And of course, there is some reduction in terms of debt to GDP. Government is saying that it will now come down to 74% instead of the 77.7% that was initially projected in the medium-term budget policy statement. For more reaction, I'm now handing over to Bulelani, my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Tsepo. And we'll take more reaction now. Good Party Secretary General is Brett Herron. And for you as the Good Party, is this a good story told by the Finance Minister?
No, it's not a good story at all. I mean, the story starts off with the expression by the Finance Minister that we can expect 1.1% average growth over the next few years. And that underpins what we've been saying, and that is we have an economic growth crisis in South Africa. We needed to hear from the President an economic growth plan that was coherent, and from the Minister of Finance we needed an economic growth plan that is coherent, because we need at least 5 to 6% annual growth if we're going to reduce unemployment meaningfully and lift people out of poverty. So this was not a budget that's going to address unemployment or poverty, and it was not a good news story.
Marginal increases in social grants, do they go far enough?
No, they do not go far enough. And if you're going to address poverty, we need to look at the social security system. The big disappointment, obviously, was the inability of the government to move beyond the extension of this 350 rand per month social relief of distress grant. That should have been converted into a basic income grant that at least meets the lower bound poverty line of about 1,000 rand per month. So tinkering with the social grant system, adding 20 rand here, 50 rand there, 100 rand spread over 2 payments to the old age pension is simply not good enough.
All right, thank you so much, Brett Herron, Secretary General of the Good Party. I see that the bells of Parliament are ringing for another important matter, but But before that begins, ATM President is Vuyo Zungula. As the party, how did you receive this budget?
This budget is a missed opportunity in the sense that it did not attempt to stimulate the economy in terms of ensuring that the economy is production driven, is manufacturing driven. We've got a PIC that is managing over 2.6 trillion, but you find that majority of that 2.6 trillion goes towards companies that are listed on the JSE, and very few, a low amount goes towards the SMMEs. And again, that amount goes towards programs that are consumer driven instead of programs that are towards manufacturing and production driven. Because we're of the view as a party that in order to stimulate the economy, we need to be very, very vigorous in terms of the local production of goods and services. And the only way to do that, it is to fund programs that are towards opening factories. That is the only way in which we could stimulate the economy. The second one, there's a missed opportunity on the informal sector, because that sector has got over 500 billion that is circulating that sector per annum. And majority of that sector is in the hands of foreign nationals that are coming from other countries, making use of the infrastructure of public services, but they are contributing nothing in terms of taxes because they are not taxed. So there's a missed opportunity in terms of revenue collecting, and that is the reason why the government keeps on wanting to borrow money instead of utilizing the economies that are there in the country for tax collection.
All right, thank you so much. Vuyo Zungula is the ATM President. For more analysis, we now cross to Nobu.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. I'm in conversation with Kim Silberman. She's from Matrix Asset Management. Thank you very much for speaking to us, Kim. So, of course, economists have been looking at this budget closely. You're one of them. You were in the lockup. Your overall impressions of this budget, was it progressive, given the fact that, of course, there were a lot of constraints for the minister?
Progressive in terms of the way that it deals with redistribution of wealth, perhaps. I mean, it increased spending by around 250 billion, and that was mainly on wages and other social grants and social spending. I think the problem there is we're not sure where Treasury is getting the money from. So it was really unspecified where that additional 250 billion is coming from, and that will determine how progressive it really is.
Of course, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana talked about this thing that we've all been hearing about recently, reliance on the golden foreign exchange contingency reserve account. They're going to be tapping onto that to the tune of 150 billion rand. Just break it down for the layperson at home. What does this mean exactly? Is this a good thing? Will help government? Do they have to pay that money back?
Okay, so maybe to put it in some context, they don't have to pay the money back, and basically it's free money. So they're not paying for that money at all. And we're not losing our foreign reserves either. So what the Reserve Bank is doing is they're taking the profits that we've made on holding our foreign reserves. So we've been holding $50 billion, and obviously with the depreciation of the rand, that's now worth a lot more. And that profit is allowed to be used by treasuries. This is not uncommon. So we're doing something that is done throughout the world. And what you can do is access that cash. But of course, if you access that cash as treasury, either you sell those reserves, which we don't want to do because we need reserves, or the SABC can actually just print money, which is what they're going to do. The risk that you run there is that money could be inflationary, because essentially you're printing money. And the SABC has been in negotiations and talks with the IMF, etc., around how this can be non-inflationary. And I think that from what I can see, they do have a procedure and a facility, and it won't be an inflationary impact on South Africa. Now that money is, I think, it's wise to use it at a time when our debt service costs are rising at 17% year on year, and debt service costs are the biggest component of spending. I mean, we spend more on that than on health or community development or education. And so to be able to take that money, which essentially is at no cost, it reduces the cost of funding, and you can use it to pay down debt. So to reduce our debt stock and really put us on a better trajectory in terms of of our interest payments, and that frees up cash to spend on other things.
It does sound a little bit like a quick fix, to be honest, because we see that the growth rate has actually been downwardly adjusted to 0.6% for this particular financial year, for the fiscal year 2023 to 2024, which ends at the end of March this year. But then as well, what's interesting is that the minister says that over the medium term, revenues are going to be 45 billion rand higher than expected. It's very confusing.
I think you touched on that in terms of the bracket creep. So the money's coming from us, it's coming from taxpayers. And I mean, there were some other things that they made mention of, you know, the two-pot system where you can access some of your retirement savings. So that also will be taxed. So they're going to access around, I think, 5 billion from the two-pot system. And then when you increase wages that you pay government workers, you also tax those government workers. So there's money as well in increasing those wages. So in that way, we're increasing revenue, but it is through taxes, it's not through growth.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yes.
Kim, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for speaking to us as always. Kim Silberman, she's an economist at Matrix Asset Managers. So we're going to hand over now to my colleague, Tsepo Mongwai.
Thank you very much, Nompu. And of course, government and National Treasury in particular has maintained that debt consolidation continues, but also indicated that in their budget review that they will continue to make sure that some of the budget cuts that were announced in the medium-term budget policy statement are reversed. So there is some revisions in terms of those cuts. For more on this, we are now joined by FEDUSA's Secretary General, Ritva Ajam. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your time. Do you think that as the workers, you have expressed unhappiness with some of the budget cuts? Is this budget speech addressing those concerns?
Well, good afternoon, first and foremostly, and let me add that this is the last budget of the sixth administration, so many of the rabbits will have to be pulled out of the hat today here. The only element that brings us a degree of comfort is only but two. Number one, that there has not been an increase in the general fuel levy, and this most certainly brings relief to millions of commuters and workers at the same time. And secondly, that the minister had heeded caution in terms of the additional allocations that had been brought forward to the budgets in terms of education, health, police in particular, and at the same time the allocation to the NHI. But we have to caution that we will be effective and stringent oversight mechanisms in terms of that implementation phase to make sure that the 10,000 additional police officers are being brought to the fore, to make sure that service delivery and the protection of our citizens are in place, especially now that we are seeing that the critical expenditure is in place. So it's to one extent assisting. On the other hand, there are some challenges that have been identified.
The inflation adjustment, or so-called bracket creep, was not announced, so it means that workers will not have that cushion against inflation. Your take on that?
Absolutely. We have uttered this before, that the minister should not treat this budget, this national budget, as a household budget. We are seeing the ravaging effects of inflation. When you get an increase, you in essence are seeing a demotion in terms of what you have as disposable income. When the electricity prices are skyrocketing, when the fuel prices are running away, and when food prices are simply not reined in, how then do we manage? So ultimately, that would have been one of the elements that we had hoped that the minister would effectively address. But unfortunately, with the lower income and the revenue that has been generated, we most certainly acknowledge that, but it must be an element that the minister has to address in future budgets.
Thank you very much. That's Ms. Ritva Ajam. He's the Secretary General of FEDUSA. I now hand over to my colleague, Bulelani Phillips.
Thank you so much, Tsepo. Of course, the opposition not impressed by the finance minister's budget speech. Let's take a look at what the ruling party says. Dr. Gwen Ramokgopa is the ANC's Treasurer General. Of course, you'd be happy as the ruling party because you would have given him counsel and guidance in terms of what he needs to put in his speech. But the question really that's being raised by the opposition is that money can be allocated, but does it go to the intended purpose?
Thank you very much, Bulelani, and greetings to viewers. Indeed, we are supportive of the Minister's approach, very balanced, acknowledging that the economy is not yet fully recovered, and as he has said, he has put more money on the economic growth areas like rail, electricity and other infrastructure. He has also prioritized reducing government debt and servicing of the debt, and more importantly, the investment in the social security net, schooling, health, including NHI, the initial capital to get the NHI going, and as well as looking at other services like police services and all that. So it's really balanced and responsible.
One of the key issues really raised also in the State of the Nation address is the issue of fighting crime and corruption. Now, as the ANC TG, we're told that one of your donors is a person who's a criminal accused, Edwin Sodi. Firstly, is he a donor to the ANC? And as the ANC, how do you deal with people who have got questionable business with government and also are the donors of the party?
Bulelane, I make it very clear in the way I work that we've got three priorities. One, to improve the brand ANC. We acknowledge that there are people who did wrong things in the name of the ANC, but we are saying let the might of the law take its toll. Let them answer. They were not sent to do wrong things. The second issue is to also have a credible and effective leadership and impactful leadership. So we stick on those principles, obviously from my side also to have a balanced, a healthy balance sheet, and we're also gunning for a clean audit. So we have our books open, we are also audited by the IEC and all that, and we are accountable. If people do wrong, let them face the might of the law, like many others are.
Lastly and quickly, are you able to give us a sense of what is the ANC's election budget?
I will not now disclose that, because we are, as we implement programs, we're also fundraising. Just this morning, I had an activation breakfast for our pledge program, where donations can be as little as 10 rands. So we are funding it from our own support base and our own membership. And with that commitment that is there, the positive spirit, we're looking forward to a resounding victory.